Last week, the Department of Labor and OSHA released some new guidelines, some new standards. In fact, it's called COVID-19 Healthcare Emergency Temporary Standard, or in short, it's called an ETS, Emergency Temporary Standard, ETS. And it could impact your practice in your office and some of the requirements. So what I want to do is give, first of all, one big caveat to this. This standard does not change the requirement that in a healthcare setting, everyone still wears a mask. So doctors, staff, and patients, according to both the state and the CDC, should be wearing masks. And so we still urge you to do that. This standard does not change that. Now, what does the standard change, or what could it impact? First of all, what I want to do is tell you who it actually applies to, and then we'll talk briefly about what all is wrapped up inside of this, because I believe the vast majority of you are going to be able to exercise the exemption on this. And so, first of all, the exemption applies to ambulatory settings or private settings like your practice that aren't hospitals, facilities, things along those lines. Instead, they're private settings or small settings like yourself. And in those cases, then, as long as you are screening your patients for COVID and not allowing COVID positive cases to come into your practice. So in other words, if you're going through your standard patient screening protocols with the screening sheet, checking symptoms, as well as checking temperature when they come in, and if they are exhibiting symptoms of COVID at that stage, then you would ask them to leave and go get a negative test to come back in. As long as you're exercising those types of protocols for your practice, screening patients, and you're in that small setting, you're not a hospital, which you are, in that case, then you're exempt from this ETS, or from this emergency temporary standard. So that's important. I want to start with that. That's the exemption. And that is an impetus to continue screening your patients. So if you have the patients that argue against it, you have to tell them that ultimately, you're going to have to do this under OSHA standards, and still going to be a requirement. And so we would encourage you, please continue to do that. Now, if you don't screen your patients, what are the challenges you'll be faced with in regards to this ETS? And here are some of the things that are required for practices and for healthcare settings that fall directly under this ETS. And that is, one, you have to do a workplace-specific hazard risk assessment. And when you do that, you have to involve non-managerial employees in that process. So you can't just do it yourself. You have to actually involve a non-managerial employee, if you have one, in that practice. Second is you're going to have increased paperwork, and you're going to have to develop a plan on how to deal with your risk assessment that you just performed. And if you have more than 10 employees, in fact, that plan has to be in writing. So you'd have to have a big manual in order to handle that. You would have to have increased monitoring, both of patients and staff at that stage. Then you're going to have to provide time off for vaccinations. You're going to have to paid time off for a sick leave related to COVID would be mandatory under this particular ETO or ETS. Additionally, you would have to increase your ventilation standards to meet the MERV 13 minimum ventilation standards, as well as you'd have to make sure that you had physical barriers installed, which many of you may not have gone down that road initially. But now, again, if this applies to you, you're going to have physical barriers. You would have to have a designated COVID safety coordinator. You would have to have planned training with your staff, and then you'd have to turn around and actually you have to communicate your plan to your landlord or to your management company, whichever it is for your property. If you have one, that would have to be communicated, your plan in regards to COVID, with them as well. It's one of the requirements under the ETS. And all of these provisions, or the vast majority of these provisions, other than the training and a few others, would have to be done within 14 days, but the longest time frame is 30, which basically means that from this point forward, you'd have about 2 to 4 weeks to get all of this done. The other answer is, or because of your setting, you continue to screen your patients. And so the biggest reminder that we can come with this video today is to let you know that you should continue to screen your patients. It's critically important right now, especially with this ETS hanging out there. Additionally, under state mandate as well as CDC guidelines, you want to continue to make sure that everyone is wearing a mask in your practice. Hopefully this information helps you out and explains the ETS that came out late last week, and we'll catch you next week.